Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and as you may or may not know, I love a good theme. I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I love a good theme. I decorate my mantle differently every month, depending on what is going on. Obviously, this month it is decorated for Halloween. I am currently doing a Halloween sock countdown on Instagram because it's a week until Halloween and I have 7 pairs of Halloween socks. Clearly, this means I need to do a Halloween sock countdown. I also am pairing earrings with those socks. Yeah, I don't get out much. Okay, but that's okay. I love a good theme. And it's coming up to that time of year where we've got lots of holidays coming up, and so you're going to start getting more holiday-themed books from me. Next week is Halloween on Thursday. Now, I normally do episodes on Tuesday and Friday, so next Friday would be too late, and I have an interview then anyway. I have 2 interviews next week, so Tuesday is taken up with an interview, and Friday is taken up with an interview, and is the day after Halloween. And so I'm doing it now, here on the, almost a week before Halloween, but that's okay, right? Go with me on this. It's okay. Halloween. What are your favorite memories of Halloween? It is currently snowing in Montana, off and on. It's been snowing for I can't even remember the first day it snowed. Yes, I can. It was my dad's birthday. It was October 9th. So it started snowing early, and this reminds me that my mom always tried to plan our Halloween outfits, costumes, so that they could go over a snowsuit, because you never knew how cold it was going to be on Halloween, and it sounds like it's going to be another one of those years again. Sometimes it rains and rains and rains on Halloween. Other times you get snow. Other times it's a perfectly crisp and lovely fall evening. It really just depends. I was just telling a friend of mine that one year, it was so cold I just went as a cross-country skier. I loved cross-country ski, and as a kid I went with my dad all the time, so I had the stuff. I didn't wear the skis. I don't think it had actually snowed enough to wear the skis, but I wore snow pants and, my cross-country skiing sweater and gloves and everything, and carried my poles, and I was a skier. I've talked before about one of my favorite Halloween costumes when I was Laura Ingalls Wilder. Well, Laura Ingalls, because I was the younger version of her. Loved that costume. I am trying to think of other costumes. I didn't really do other book inspired costumes. I kind of wish I had now. Other costumes. I know I have them, and that I just, for some reason, I can't picture them. In recent years, I used to work at one job that had a preschool, and so they had a preschool harvest fest every year, and so I got to dress up for that, which was very fun. And I bought a poodle skirt one year, which made me insanely happy. I have a love of crinolines that goes back to childhood, and I always wanted to. I'm sure I've mentioned before that I want to live in a 50s musical, and I love crinolines. I can't help it. I might have to drag that costume out again this year and see if it still fits. It might not. Anyway, Halloween, it's coming. And that means that I need to talk about Halloween books because I love a theme. See, we've come full circle. I love a theme. What are your favorite books about Halloween? Now, this can be, there could be any number of books. They don't actually have to be specifically about Halloween. I mean, they could be spooky or scary, but not specifically about Halloween. Or they could be, a book that takes place at Halloween, or a book that is specifically about Halloween. In fact, next week on Tuesday, you should tune in, because one of the books that I am speaking to author Abigail Drake about is called The Hocus Pocus Magic Shop. And it takes place during October, and it is about witches and magic, and Halloween does play a part in that book. So you should definitely tune in on Tuesday for that interview. But I've also mentioned before that I'm not a huge fan of horror. I don't like to read horror. I don't like to read anything. I mean, I'm kind of a wimp. I've learned to love thrillers, as long as they're not too scary, crazy. But Halloween books can be, just books that have vampires in them, or books that have witches in them, or what have you. So they don't have to be over the top scary. But if you are into that stuff, maybe you like horror, maybe you like Stephen King, maybe you like to have the socks scared off of you. My nieces love scary movies and scary books and don't seem to have any problems sleeping afterward. I overthink things, and so I overthink the horror aspects of things, and then I can't get out of bed to go to the bathroom. Let's talk first about children's books for Halloween, and especially like young children's books, so picture books. One of my favorite authors is Sandra Boynton in terms of of little kid books. She writes a lot of board books. And she has Spooky Pookie, which is a Halloween book. I follow her on social media, and I just find her delightful. So she has several Halloween-themed books out there. There's also The Little Old Lady Who Was Not Afraid of Anything. That's one of my favorite books, children's books, and that is Once Upon a Time, there was a little old lady who was not afraid of anything. But one autumn night, while walking in the woods, the little old lady heard clomp, clomp, shake, shake, clap, clap. And the little old lady who was not afraid of anything had the scare of her life. This is a classic and fun Halloween story that neither you nor the kids in your life will be able to resist, whether curled up at home or in a classroom or library setting. So that one is fun, kind of spooky. What is it? What is going on? Another favorite of mine from childhood that isn't necessarily, it's not Halloween, but it's spooky, and there was one page that scared the snot out of me as a kid. See, I was a wimp. There was one page, I would try to skip that page because it scared me so much. And that book is by Judith Viorst. It is My Mama Says There Aren't Any Zombies, Ghosts, Vampires, Creatures, Demons, Monsters, Fiends, Goblins, or Things. Judith Viorst is the queen of ginormously long titles. I have spoken about her before, and her Alexander books, which I loved as a kid. But my Mama Says There Aren't Any Zombies, Ghosts, Vampires, Creatures, Demons, Monsters, Fiends, Goblins, or Things. And the page that scared me the most was the page about the vampire. Something about My Mama Says There Aren't Any Vampires, who go clomping around at night with their eyes rolled back in their head. And, that one just scared me. The rest of it didn't really scare me. There's all kinds of other monsters, and he talks about, or is it maybe it wasn't a vampire. Let's see. No, the vampire didn't scare me. The vampire is floating over the house. It was something else. Maybe it was a fiend. Anyway, the thing had its eyes rolled back in its head and its arms stretched out before it, and it was going up the stairs, and I did not want it to come up the stairs. So Mama says these things. For instance, the book starts, My Mama says there isn't any mean-eyed monsters with long slimy hair and pointy claws going scritchy-scratch, scritchy-scritchy-scratch outside my window. But yesterday, my mama said I couldn't have some cream cheese on my sandwich because she said there wasn't any more. And then I found the cream cheese under the lettuce in the back of the Jell-O. So sometimes even mamas make mistakes. Typical Judith Viorst style, and one of my favorite books as a kid, but also scared me because I was just then a wimp and now a wimp, and you can make fun of me if you want. It's okay. Even my hubby does because he says that I am a wimp. Other children's books. What are your favorite Halloween children's books? I don't know if I have a million of them, but one that I used to enjoy reading, as I mentioned, with the preschool kids that I worked with. They used to sing the 10 Pumpkins song, and there is a book based on that that is fun to read with kids. It's a good counting book. We are going to talk more about Halloween-themed books, but let's go ahead and take our first break. And when we come back, a few more children's books, then we'll maybe move on to some young adult books and finally wrap up with adult Halloween books. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today about Halloween books, not so scary Halloween books. And before the break, we were talking about children's books and 10 Little Pumpkins. If you like the type of counting book, there's also 10 Timid Ghosts. I've spoken before about the Night Before books, and there is one in that series. Natasha Wing has a whole series of The Night Before. The first one I came in contact with was The Night Before Christmas. My brother reads that to his kids every year. They're all adults almost now. 2 adults, 1 almost adult. I don't know if he still reads it to them, but he might. And she has, as I said, a whole bunch of The Night Before books. I have talked about them before. So the Night Before Halloween starts out with, "'Twas the night before Halloween, and all through the house all the creatures were stirring, except for the mouse. The monsters had gathered to plan and prepare for the trick-or-treaters who soon would be there." It's got adorable pictures. She's got really I love her pictures. So mummies unraveled and put on new wraps. Spiders found corners and spun silky traps. So that one, that's a fun one that is, good, fun to read with your kiddos or have them read it to you. What else? I talked about the Judith Vior's book. Another book that is not exactly Halloween but does involve monsters is there's a monster, the monster at the end of this book, and that is Grover talking about how scared he is because there's a monster at the end of the book, and I'm not going to give it away, but well, you've probably read it. That's another thing. A lot of your favorite series are going to have Halloween books, like I said, The Night Before Halloween. The Berenstain Bears have a Halloween book. It's called Trick or Treat. Pinkalicious has a Halloween book. It's called Pink or Treat. I have a couple of nieces who love Pinkalicious. And I think it's now a TV series. Pete the Cat, if you have kids who are Pete the Cat fans, has a Halloween book, 5 Little Pumpkins. Peppa the Pig has a Halloween book, Peppa's Halloween Party. The I Spy books. My nieces went through a phase where they loved the I Spy books. We went through those books so many times, to see all the things. So there is a Halloween I Spy book. Let's see, Daniel Tiger has a Halloween book. Just, pretty much anything that you can imagine. I have spoken before of, Elmo has a Halloween book, of course, Pumpkin Patch Party. I have spoken before of the Junie B. Jones series, which I really love, and there is a Halloween book in that series, of course. There is another one, you may be familiar with the book Goodnight Moon. Well, have you read the book Goodnight Goon? That is a Halloween take on the classic Goodnight Moon story. It is called a petrifying parody, and it obviously follows along with the story, kind of the way the Goodnight Moon goes, but it puts in creepier elements. There's Room on the Broom, which is another popular one. That one is by Julia Donaldson. And of course there's Room on the Broom because, the witch needs to bring her cat with her and her cauldron and all of those good things. So what about books for slightly older kids? As I mentioned, Junie B. Jones Halloween series. As I said, probably most of your favorite childhood series have something that's related to Halloween. I loved Trixie Belden and Nancy Drew as a kid, and those are mysteries, so any of them could be kind of Halloween-esque. I love I've talked about the Menagerie books before. They have, supernatural, fantastical creatures in them. Anything that involves dragons or anything can be a good Halloween book. I came across a book that I have not read, but I have to tell you about it because of the title. Creepy Pair of Underwear by Aaron Reynolds. And that one, let's see, Jasper Rabbit is growing up and not afraid of the dark anymore, except that he's just gotten a new pair of underwear, and they glow eerily in the dark when the lights are off. Jasper keeps trying to get rid of them, but they keep coming back. This is a follow-up to the equally whimsical Creepy Carrots, which I have seen a bunch of times on lists. This is a seriously silly tale that will charm all ages. There's a certain age of kiddo that loves anything that involves underwear, so this would be a good one for your kids that think the word underwear is hilarious. Did you know that there is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer picture book? I have one niece who was obsessed with Angel the Vampire when she was about 4. She would sigh every time he came on the screen and say, "That's Angel. He's a vampire." My nieces are not scared of any of things like I am, so they watch Buffy and Angel as small children. At least my brother's kids did. So there is a picture book, not exactly Halloween, of course, but it's vampires and other supernatural creatures. Let's see. Buffy, Willow, and Xander. This is obviously not canon because they didn't meet as children. They are children in this book. So children, Buffy, Willow, and Xander investigate spooky closet noises, face off against familiar creatures, and seek advice from Giles. It's a twee, monsterful bedtime story. That is, I did not know that and will now have to look it up, although it is not canon, but that's maybe okay. I guess it depends on the story if it's okay or not. What are your favorite, I've asked this already, but what are your favorite Halloween books? What are your favorite picture books? What are your favorite young reader books? What are your favorite middle grade reader books? I would love to hear your thoughts. I said before the Menagerie, again, not exactly Halloween-esque, but involves fantastical creatures. So any kind of books that are fantasy could be read during the Halloween series. There is a book called Miss Smith and the Haunted Library by Michael Garland. This sounds like a book I would have been drawn to as a kid because, my dad's a librarian and I love books about libraries. Miss Smith, with her short, spiky red hair and blondie pin, is a punk rock teacher. She brings the kids to her class to meet a pale, purple-clad librarian called Virginia Creeper. Love that. Who then reads a bunch of scary stories to Miss Smith's diverse class. When characters from the books, Queen of Hearts, Dracula, pirates, start crowding the room as she reads, the kids eventually find themselves in the midst of a haunted literary party. Will they escape? This book is hilarious, it says, aimed at slightly older kids because it's rather detailed and has some funny bits that the younger ones won't understand. Gonna have to look that one up too. Yay, my book list is getting longer and longer and longer. There are a million books that you could read for Halloween. I mean, Harry Potter you could read for Halloween. There are books that involve, witches and wizards and black cats and all of those good things. I know I read more of them as a child, but I cannot obviously remember all of them off the top of my head. So what are your favorite Halloween books? What are your favorite middle grade books? One of the books that I came across for middle grade readers is The Witches by Roald Dahl. I did an episode on Roald Dahl earlier. I don't even remember when. I'd have to look it up, but it was a while back. Roald Dahl he wrote a ton of books, but The Witches, maybe could be considered a little bit scary would be one that I would be able to read for Halloween because, anyway. Roald Dahl's witchy classic is a must-read for middle grade readers who love to be spooked. A young boy is enthralled by his grandmother's stories, particularly the ones about witches. Grandmama is a retired witch hunter, and she warns the boy of their evils. On holiday at a lavish hotel, the boy is confronted by the Grand High Witch herself and promptly turned into a mouse. Together the boy, now mouse, and Grandmama must devise a plan to rid the world of witches once and for all. Witches, ghosts, vampires, skeletons, anything spooky, and the Great Pumpkin. It's the Great, although it's my favorite. There is a Great Pumpkin book in addition to watching the Great Pumpkin on TV every year. Okay, time to take that second break, and when we come back, let's turn to those adult books that I'd probably be too scared to read. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and this Halloween-themed book podcast episode. We've talked about several books for several different ages, and now for this last segment, we'll talk about some adult books for Halloween. Again, these can be anything that sort of veers to the fantastical. If you like fantasy and you like supernatural, then any fantasy supernatural book could be considered Halloween. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be creepy. But if you like that sort of thing, maybe you are into Stephen King, whose books, I'm told, can scare the pants off of you. I have only read his non-horror stuff. I did read Salem's Lot. Okay, so I have read a horror book by Stephen King. Go me. But mostly I have read things like The Dark Tower and The Green Mile, those types of books that are less scary. I have not been able to read books like The Shining or Carrie or any of those. Just can't quite bring myself to do it. Maybe they aren't as bad as I have made them out in my head to be. Or maybe they are just as scary as I think they are. But books, let's see, there's 1,000 books. 1,000 books? No, there are 1,000 lists of books for you to look at, to find, a Halloween themed book to read this year or next year or whenever. Let's see. I have read, I Am Legend and Other Stories by Richard Matheson. I Am Legend is actually a short story involving vampire-like creatures. If you've seen the Will Smith movie, which is good, they took a short story and made it into a full-length movie, 30 years after the book was written. So it's very, very, very different than the short story and does not end the same at all. I will not, go into that. Macbeth. This list has Macbeth by, William Shakespeare. So, that one's still got creepy elements to it. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be scary. It can just simply be creepy. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a good classic, along with Shelley's Frankenstein. There is, of course, The Shining. There's Edgar Allan Poe, if you like creepy, sort of literary classic creepy. I have read several of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, but I think the best way for me for Edgar Allan Poe is, well, it's not really practical because it involves my high school English teacher who is now retired, but he read us The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and he had this voice, and he really got all those rhymes in there, nevermore. And so whenever I think of Edgar Allan Poe, I think of Ron Rood, my high school English teacher, one of my high school English teachers, and that is, I don't know, the only way I want to read Edgar Allan Poe is to have it read to me by Mr. Rood. Salem's Lot. Did I say that I read that, or did I get confused and say I read something else? That's the Stephen King book that I have read. Interview with the Vampire. I've read that one. So maybe you are into vampire books. Along that line, maybe the True Blood series, which is very different from the television series, of course. They both kind of went off the rails, but in different ways. They went in some very different directions, but if you are into vampires and shapeshifters and those sorts of things, that might be something. The Haunting of Hill House. I can't do it. I cannot read it. It sounds so scary. Coraline by Neil Gaiman, which is, I have been told, much scarier than the movie, it's creepy in itself. The Amityville Horror. Nope, not going to read that. Sorry, I know. If you have read all of these, then you are probably sitting there thinking, my gosh, you're a wimp. We Have Always Lived in a Castle is another one that is by Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Haunting of Hill House. So I'm going to assume it's creepy. Sorry. Pet Sematary by Stephen King. The Exorcist. No. The Phantom of the Opera is listed. So maybe that could be Halloween-esque. Harry Potter is on this list. Love it. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That is Scary Stories #1 by Alvin Schwartz. That sounds like a good book to add to your list. I Am Legend, I already mentioned that one. The Hound of the Baskervilles, that's a Sherlock Holmes. That's Arthur Conan Doyle. Sookie Stackhouse. Geez, the first one in that is called Dead Until Dark, and that is on this list. This is a Goodreads list that I'm scrolling through. There's like 895 books on it, but Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, that is a series, and that is, I wouldn't say Halloween-esque, but again has a lot of Halloween elements in it. And I have not yet seen the movie. Did I watch the movie? See, that's terrible. No, I haven't seen the movie, but I have read the first 3 books. I have not had a chance to read the new one that just recently came out. Bunnicula. This is going to tell you that, I couldn't even read Bunnicula as a kid. It scared me. There was a movie that came on Saturday mornings during this time of year, and even Bunnicula scared me. What can I say? The Walking Dead. There are lots of graphic novels for The Walking Dead. Obviously, it's based on a series of graphic novels. Have not read them. There are some things in there that are very different from the series, the television series, of course. So be aware of that if you decide to do that. Now, The Night Circus. The Night Circus is by Aaron Morgenstern, and this keeps coming up in conversation when I look for requests, or when I look for recommendations for books to read from friends. This one is often mentioned. I have not had a chance to read it. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it. It is simply there, when yesterday it was not. Within the black and white striped canvas tents is an utterly unique experience full of breathtaking amazements. It's called Le Cirque de Rêve, and it is only open at night. But behind the scenes, a fierce competition is underway. A duel between 2 young magicians, Celia and Marco, who have been trained since childhood expressly for this purpose by their mercurial instructors. Unbeknownst to them, this is a game in which only one can be left standing, and the circus is but a stage for a remarkable battle of imagination and will. Despite themselves, however, Celia and Marco tumble headfirst into love, a deep, magical love that makes the lights flicker and the room grow warm whenever they so much as brush hands. True love or not, the game must play out, and the fates of everyone involved, from the cast of extraordinary circus performers to the patrons, hang in the balance, suspended as precariously as the daring acrobats overhead. That is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Clearly, I need to put it on my list because that sounds good. All right, so I am sure you have read some, if not all, of the books on this list, but what are your favorite Halloween go-to books? Depending on, are you reading with children? Are you reading for yourself? What are your favorite books for this time of year? I love a good theme, and I love to have, my own lists in my head of books that I can read around certain holiday times. So hit me up on social media, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let me know. As always, if you liked this podcast, or you like this podcast, if you like this episode or you like the podcast, please do me the favor of subscribing, of following us on social media, of giving us a lovely 5-star review. I would so very much appreciate that. It helps us more than you can possibly know. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Join me, as I said again, on Tuesday for my interview with author Abigail Drake about 2 of her new books. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Maybe you're going to a Halloween party this weekend, but whatever you're doing, I hope it involves time to get lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.